This is Week 5, Unit 2, War and Politics in the Early Middle Ages, and we're going to be focusing on the Byzantine Empire, the Empire of Byzantium. This is the Polidoro, and that is the altarpiece of St. Mark's Church in Venice, the main church in the city of Venice. And this magnificent work of gold and precious stones was not made in Venice. It was made in Constantinople, and the Venetians acquired it in two different ways. Parts of it they commissioned and bought from Constantinople, and other parts of it they pillaged from Constantinople when the Venetians, leading the Fourth Crusade, captured the city in the year 1204 AD. The Polidoro is one of the most impressive remains of Byzantine art, and the reason for this, one of the most impressive products of the Byzantine Empire is found in Venice, is that, of course, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, and much of the Christian art was destroyed after the conquest because the Turkish regime did not support the Christian religion. They were a Muslim country, and they saw no value. And in fact, in many ways, they saw Christian religious art as particularly blasphemous because it depicted human beings, which they argued, based on the Ten Commandments, that you are not supposed to do. You shouldn't worship a graven image. You shouldn't make an image of someone and pray to it. And of course, the whole sort of visual structure of Byzantine religion is praying to icons. So there's a real philosophical quandary there about the status of the image. But in any case, this is why many of the traces of the Byzantine Empire are now found in places that are not Byzantium. They're found in places like Venice and Ravenna in Italy and scattered in other parts of the world. Well, how did the Byzantine Empire come to be? The Byzantine Empire is really the continuation of the Roman Empire. What happens in the 4th century AD is, as the Roman Empire comes under threat from barbarian invasions from Central Europe, it splits into two pieces. There's the Western Roman Empire, in what is France, Spain, England, Italy, North Africa, and there's the Eastern Roman Empire in what is today Greece, Turkey, the Middle East, and Egypt. And as you can see from this map, the barbarian invasions primarily hit the Western Roman Empire. They pass through near Constantinople, but they don't take Constantinople, which is the capital of the Eastern Empire. The capital was moved from Rome to Constantinople, beginning with Emperor Constantine, partly as a defensive measure. Constantinople is a much more strategically well-placed city than Rome. It's more naturally defensible as well, we'll see. Why is Constantinople such an important place? Because it links the Black Sea with the Mediterranean Sea and controls it. If we take a look close up, here is a map of the connections between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, and Constantinople is at the mouth of a very narrow but navigable strait called the Bosphorus, which joins the Black Sea to the smaller Sea of Marmara, and then the Sea of Marmara through the Hellespont, which is over in this area here, connects to the Aegean Sea, which is part of the Mediterranean. And so this controls really trade between Europe and Asia. It controls sea trade from the Black Sea, which is where Russian trade would come from, and trades from places further east. But it also controls the land routes from Asia Minor to Greece, which is the main land route between Europe and Asia. So Constantinople, in that sense, was a very good place to put a capital. It's also, the physical site of Constantinople is enormously defensible. This is a sort of imagined reconstruction of what Constantinople would have looked like from the air in the imperial period. And you can see that Constantinople is built on a peninsula between the Sea of Marmara, the Bosphorus, and the Golden Horn, which is a very deep inlet. And so it's a wonderful place for harbors. You've got a ship harbor here. You have 3 sides of the city are defended by water, so if you have a good navy, nobody is attacking you. And several times in Byzantine history, armies would get to the right across from Constantinople, but didn't have the ships to cross, and so that's an enormous defensive concern. The 4th side is protected by the land walls, which were some of the greatest and most powerful walled fortifications ever built around any city anywhere in the world. And so in that way, Constantinople could be fortified much better than Rome, which is just sort of a city that's in in a sort of flat area near the sea and had to be defended on all sides by walls. Constantinople had the advantage of being surrounded on three sides by water. So if we look at the image here, we get a sense of the layout of the city. Here is the Imperial Palace complex, the Hippodrome here, which is the horse riding, the chariot racing arena, which was the most popular form of entertainment in the Byzantine Empire. Hagia Sophia, the great church, is built here. And then there was a magnificent street that led from the center of the city out to the walls, and there were several forums built along that street in a kind of procession way, and the emperors could process along the street at various festivals and so on. Harbors here, and also the Golden Horn is a magnificent place for docking ships, partly because you can put a chain across the entry of the Golden Horn, and that stops other ships, enemy ships, from coming in. So Constantinople, in so many ways, a very, very well-defended place. Constantinople fell to siege only twice. In 1204 AD, it fell to the Crusaders of the Fourth Crusade, who decided they didn't want to go to the Holy Land. They wanted to pillage Constantinople instead. And in 1453, it fell finally to the Ottoman Turks after really warfare of many hundreds of years, with the Turks wanting to take the city of Constantinople. When the Turks take it, it changes its name to Istanbul, which is thought to be a variation on the Greek phrase meaning to the city, Istempolis. And so it's interesting that the name still remains in some sense Greek, but in any case, Constantinople, the city of Emperor Constantine. Here's a map of the city showing in a map form what we just looked at in the sort of aerial view, and you can see the great palace here, the Hippodrome, Hagia Sophia, and so on, and also the streets passing out to the great gates in the walls, and you get a sense there. There's also this area here called Galata on the other side of the Golden Horn. This was where very often trade delegations and ambassadors lived, and a lot of foreigners lived in this area. Later on, Venetians lived here in great numbers as they traded with Constantinople. Here is a modern picture of the Aqueduct of Valens, which runs to this day through the middle of Istanbul. And it's a reminder that Constantinople was really just a continuation of Rome. And so Roman aqueducts look like this in Rome. They look like this in Constantinople too. And they brought water a long way from the hinterland of the city into the city so that the city could have a supply of fresh drinking water. And the aqueduct system for Constantinople was quite remarkable in its size and scope, and certainly equal to that of found in Rome. Here are mosaic pictures from Ravenna in northern Italy of Justinian, Emperor Justinian, and Empress Theodora. Justinian is the most famous emperor of Byzantium for a variety of reasons. First, as we've seen in the introduction to this week, he was the one who built Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, which was the greatest building built in Istanbul. But he also codified Roman law. He decided to organize Roman law into one massive work that would compile all the civil Roman law. And this Codex of Justinian, which was compiled under his direction by legal scholars in the 6th century AD, is the basis for, to this day, the basis of much European law. It takes all the law that had existed previously in the Roman Empire, puts it in a coherent and easily accessible form, and this forms the basis of the law of most European countries to this day. Not England, because England follows common law, but of France, of Italy, of Spain, and so on. Justinian also tried very hard to reconquer the Western Empire, and he was unsuccessful in this, partly because of a plague which hit Byzantium just as he was at the height of his power. He is pictured here with Empress Theodora, who is a very interesting person as well. She supported the emperor very fiercely at many times during his career, and she's remarkable in part because she came from very humble origins. She was a dancing girl, and some said a prostitute, who the emperor married and made empress, and she was a very effective ruler along with her husband. Here in the 6th century are the conquests of Justinian. So after the western part of the Roman Empire falls to the barbarians, Justinian controls all that you see in pink on this map, with the city of Constantinople there as his capital. So all of Egypt, which is where the grain comes from, all of Greece, which is still one of the most civilized and urbanized parts of the empire, all of what is now Israel, Lebanon, Syria, these countries, also wealthy areas in the Roman period. So most of the wealth of Rome, Justinian still controls. And with the help of his great general Belisarius, one of the greatest generals of all time, he was able to reconquer Italy, including the city of Rome. He was able to reconquer North Africa as far as Carthage, and also founded for a time an imperial city at Ravenna in North Italy, where some of the most beautiful Byzantine mosaics surviving still exist. And it looked like, for a time, that Justinian was set to reconquer the rest of the Roman Empire, but because of the plague which hit and decimated the population, a horrible, horrible plague, almost as bad as the Black Death of the 14th century, his conquests came to nothing, and he, at the end of his reign, the empire was no bigger than it was when he came to the throne. Here we see the walls of Constantinople. These are the original walls. They've been fixed up a bit. This is an area that's been restored, as the walls weren't always kept in this kind of shape. But you can see what a formidable obstacle they would pose to any land invader. They were 3 layers thick and were set up so that the walls got higher the further you went. And so if you conquered the first wall, there'd still be people shooting at you from the second wall. These walls, as we've said, were only breached twice in over 1,000 years. And here's another thing that kept Constantinople going, their invention of Greek fire. Nobody really knows how this worked. What it was a tube, as you can see, that spat fire. Not a long way, but long enough to burn people in other boats, or this was used on land as well. People have speculated it might have been some kind of petroleum product, maybe found in Crimea, some kind of resin with petroleum in it. But no one knows exactly the mechanism for making Greek fire work. But what it did, it was an early medieval flamethrower. And not only was it a horrific weapon to face in battle, it was also something the Byzantines kept as a secret. The Arabs figured out a kind of parallel system, but really nobody ever figured out how Greek fire worked. They were very successful at keeping this secret weapon secret in terms of how to use it. And it was a great factor in their ability to hold out for so long against so many external forces. Almost the entire history of Byzantium is a history of fighting off various invading armies, which they did successfully for almost 1,000 years. Well, the greatest blow to the Byzantines was the Muslim expansion of the 7th century. And the Muslim religion, as we'll see, grows out of Arabia and very quickly takes over enormous areas of the world. And this is portrayed sometimes as conquest, but the reality is that very often the people living in places like Egypt and Jerusalem were not unhappy to see Muslims come invading, partly because the variety of Christianity that they practiced was one that was not in favor at the imperial court, and they were being persecuted. The populations of these cities were actually being persecuted by the Byzantine Empire when the Muslims came. And the Muslims, when the Muslim armies arrived, they gave everyone a choice. They could either convert immediately to Islam, or they could remain Christian and pay an extra tax as non-Muslim people living in a Muslim country. And that was not fair, strictly speaking, to pay more tax because of what your religion is, but it was much better treatment than the Christians of Alexandria and Jerusalem and Antioch and Carthage had been getting from the Byzantine emperor. So they quickly chose one way or the other, happily enough in most cases it seems. And Christian communities remained in all these cities throughout the Middle Ages, but the majority became Muslim. And this was an enormous blow to the Byzantines because they lost the wealthy lands of Egypt and also the rich trading areas of the Holy Land around Jerusalem. But the main loss was all the resources of Egypt, the grain harvest and so on. And really, after the 9th century, Byzantium was reduced to little bits of southern Italy and Sicily, but mostly what is today the countries of Greece and Turkey. And these were the areas that they controlled more or less successfully for another 600 years. But there was continual pressure on them from Muslim armies to the east wanting to take more and more territory until the Ottoman Turks finally took the city in 1453. Finally, our look at the Byzantine Empire will end with this 6th century icon from St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Peninsula, and it reminds us of the deep spirituality at the heart of Byzantine culture. The icon, the image of here Christ, but in other examples, saints that would be worshipped, was central to Byzantine devotion, and it's really the image we carry with it today. If it looks Russian, that's not a coincidence, because the Russian Orthodox Church was founded by missionaries from Constantinople, and there's a strong sort of historical connection between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Greek Orthodox Church that was based in the Byzantine Empire.